CLL and me, this is the story or fragments of the last 15 years of my life with CLL as an uninvited companion, and how I've got to fifth line treatment, which isn't as ghastly as it might seem. I'm going to go back 15 years. I was on a zip line 600 feet up, sort of above a gorge with a river deep down, going at speeds of up to 50 miles an hour, absolutely terrifying. It's not what I would usually do, but I was in Costa Rica. 12 hours later, an ambulance was weaving through dense nighttime fog on a 6-hour journey to get me to hospital in the capital. So what on earth has this got to do with CLL? Well, everything and nothing. Some 6 months earlier, I'd been diagnosed with CLL on a blood count done for another reason. I was referred to Dr. Agrawal at Bart's and warned that I would expect to need treatment sooner rather than later because I had the 11q deletion. Hence, a vague bucket list and a desire to go and see a jungle. I survived the zip line with huge amounts of adrenaline, but that evening, walking across a restaurant, I didn't look where I was going, and I fell 6 feet down a concealed concrete staircase, landing at the bottom with a broken hip. Nothing to do with CLL, except that I wouldn't have thought of going to Costa Rica otherwise. The last 15 years have also been a roller coaster, CLL-wise and life-wise. I spent 25 years as a GP in a country practice, retiring early, way back in 2000 when my husband was very sick with an enduring mental health problem, and the strain on the family was immense. And little did I know what was going to open up and the avenues that I would be able to explore. Before I was diagnosed, I'd been involved in setting up a day hospice service for the Forest of Dean, where I lived, and this was the first retirement project. I'd also had a lot of time for choral singing, which had always been a passion, and was using this to develop different projects, including one bringing music to people with dementia, which has gone on to become quite a big Gloucestershire charity. The CLL was in the background, and I didn't think about it much apart from obviously when I had appointments. But as predicted, I needed treatment within 3 years, and I was keen to enter a clinical trial, but there was only one that was open to me, a drug called lenalidomide, formerly known as thalidomide, which you'll remember from the birth defects. In fact, the trial was halted within 3 months of me starting and being allocated to the active treatment. Not all trials have favourable outcomes, and there have been excess deaths in the treatment arm. But the important thing was that these 3 months counted as first-line treatment, and it made a major difference to the treatment I was able to have later on. At that time, the gold standard was FCR. This is, back probably 12 years ago. And this would have been the only option if I'd been treated locally. With my markers, it wouldn't have been that good, and probably any remission would have been short-lived. But I'd heard about ibrutinib and the development of the new targeted treatments, and was delighted when Dr. Agrawal managed to get this treatment for me under the NHS Cancer Drugs Fund. This is a sort of compassionate care program, which you may know about, where drugs are made available to patients if they've got the promise of doing well, but earlier than sort of general release when they've gone through the full NICE process. Well, ibrutinib worked very well, and I carried on with it for 2 to 3 years when I started getting some numbness at my feet. And this was blamed on peripheral neuropathy due to the drug. And so I stopped it. I was told I could carry on, or stop, or have a break, but I decided just to stop. And this, of course, had been second-line treatment. And so when about 18 months later, I was running into trouble again, I was now ready for third-line treatment, and venetoclax was just arriving. Again, it hadn't been approved by NICE, but I had it under the National, the Cancer Drug Fund. And it was just monotherapy then, that there was no rituximab or obinutuzumab along with it. And it was open-ended, not for a fixed duration of time. And I stayed on it and did extremely well. But my immune system was taking more and more of a knock. I was getting more and more chest infections with a number of hospital admissions over the course of a few months, despite taking prophylactic antibiotics. And so I was approved for IVIG treatment, that is immunoglobulin treatment given into a vein, which there's a great shortage of it, but because my levels of immunoglobulin were so low, I fulfilled the criteria. It's made from it's plasma, and it's pooled from thousands of patients, so you're getting lots of different antibodies, and it's worked really well for me. I haven't actually had a hospital admission for an infection since I've been on it, but I'm touching wood very hard. After a few months, it was changed to the subcutaneous form, that is, an injection under the skin of the tummy, which I do at home every week. It's actually, I like it much better, and it suits me better. It gives you a much steadier level of the immunoglobulin. If you can think, with the intravenous one, you usually have it sort of about every 3 to 4 weeks, and so you get sort of peaks and troughs. Whereas with the subcutaneous one, it's a much sort of steadier sort of level. My CLL has had various complications over the years, mainly sort of autoimmune, including hemolytic anemia. And after the first COVID vaccination, my platelet count dropped very low. It happened again after the second one, and it appeared to be a reaction to the Pfizer vaccine. And so I was told not to have any more. This means that I do have quite an infection risk. Well, not just for that, I haven't had any other vaccines either. I mean, it didn't seem it was thought not to be a very good idea. But life is about risk and benefit. And I do what's important to me, but I'm realistic about it. The choir is probably it's definitely my biggest risk, but it's one I'm prepared to take because the sense of well-being that singing gives me is so huge. I mitigate it by choosing where I sit, usually in the front row, away from most people, and not near anybody with a cold or cough. I do know that if I get even an ordinary cold, I'll be unwell for at least 6 weeks, and often longer, with the infection coming back every time I think I'm over it. So my venetoclax, which had been my third line treatment, was actually stopped when I had the reaction to the COVID vaccine because there was concern it might be due to the venetoclax. And again, I managed fine for 18 months, 2 years, but then it was pretty well exactly 2 years ago, I was running into trouble again. And so it was decided I could have venetoclax for the second time, which made it fourth line treatment. And the protocol for venetoclax, when you have it a second time, is that you have it with the monoclonal antibody rituximab. And so I started this, but somehow it never seemed to work quite as well as it had the first time. And last autumn, I was aware I wasn't as well, and I was starting to lose weight and feeling very tired. And all this got worse over the next few months. I'd lost over 10 kilos and very tired, and I was becoming increasingly anemic. And bone marrow was done. That's the fifth bone marrow I've had, which showed that my bone marrow was once more full of CLL. And the venetoclax had stopped working. I was really worried at that time because I thought I'd reached the end of the road. I'd never felt as ill. But never say never, because there was a drug left, one that had only been approved by NICE about 6 months before, and that was zanubrutinib, BTK inhibitor, the next generation on from ibrutinib. And so I started that in April as a fifth line treatment, and that is working extremely well. It worked dramatically. Now, if you have CLL as I have it, you have to accept you may need to go into hospital as an emergency. This isn't to worry anybody, but particularly if you're on your own, as I am, life is so much easier if you've got things ready. Trying to get somebody to go back home and find things is hard work. And the number one thing is phone charger and earphones. Some of the wards now are starting to have phone chargers. But if you've got some of your own personal things, like your own washing things, something to read, a hairbrush, eye mask, all of these make totally different experience. And it's also important that you do have your medication with you, that the ward may not have every drug you're on, and so there might be a gap before it can actually be prescribed. And a list of your medications, obviously a good idea. But I just have a backpack ready. I put it in a spare room. I check it about once every 6 months. Sometimes I raid it and try to remember, but I'm not infallible. So occasionally there are things missing. The other thing I just wanted to tell you about quickly is my dog. I've always had dogs. I love dogs. And 8 years ago, my old dog, much loved Labrador, died. And I thought, I can't have another dog. I don't know what's going to happen to me. It wouldn't be fair. And I went nearly 3 years without a dog. And then I got hold of Molly, who's the yellow fox red Labrador, who's looking direct at the camera. And I've deliberately shown her with her friends. She's here on her own with me. But before I got her, I'd sorted out a very good dog boarder. And within a couple of weeks of having Molly, she'd had to go to dog boarder because I was admitted to hospital. And it's her second home. And these are her doggy friends from there who belong to the dog boarder. And I've also got a dog walker who helps with walking as needed. More recently, I was getting worried about what would happen to Molly. You know, if I became unable to look after her, or indeed if I died. And I'd heard about the Cinnamon Trust, and I would commend it to you. It's a trust that basically recognizes the importance of pets to both elderly people and those with life-threatening, terminally ill conditions. Um, and Molly is registered with the Cinnamon Trust. If I become unable to look after her, she's already profiled by them. They will take her, they'll find a foster home while everything's being sorted, and then she will go to long-term foster care. She'll remain in the ownership of the Cinnamon Trust, who will pay all vet's bills and other expenses. But she's my most loyal companion, and I think, you know, particularly when you're on your own, you've got to make provision for these things. Over the years, I've done so many things since I've had CLL. One is with the choir. We've now done 6 European choir tours, which is something I've sort of been very involved in organising. And 2 years ago, we sang in St. Mark's in Venice, within a couple of weeks of the city being open after COVID, and it was a memorable experience. Next year, if I'm well enough, we're going to Transylvania, so I hope to be there. When I was diagnosed, I didn't expect to have grandchildren. I didn't know when it would happen, but in fact, I've got a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, and this spring, my third granddaughter arrived, and I think it's one of the reasons for keeping going is, you know, that I love my grandchildren very much, and I hope they love me. They come for sleepovers. They only live half an hour away, and I hope we can enrich each other's lives. I don't know what life would have been like if I hadn't had CLL. You know, it's impossible to say. You know, in a way, it's enriched things because I live far more in the present than I used to. Um, I don't take things for granted quite so much. Some things I don't get to do. I was supposed to have a party 3 weeks ago. It was because I didn't know if I get to my next big birthday. So 3 weeks ago, I arranged for 40 people, extended family, for a lunch party. And in fact, I landed up in hospital 2 days before with a major metabolic problem. It was too complicated to go into here, but I was very ill. The party went on without me, but at least it wasn't a wake because I was afraid that would be the next party. But, you know, I don't know what comes next, but, you know, life is fun, life is great. CLL support is great, and I've been a trustee for some 3 years now. And make the most of what you've got. Thank you.